to the regime. They were tried back in 2013 in what the UN described as an unfair trial. Many were tried in person, and indeed some are still in prison, even though their sentences are now complete. Others were tried and convicted in absentia. And then what we are now seeing is when those who are convicted in absentia are traveling to states where the Arab Interpol has influence, that they are then rendered back to the UAE. And again, more of our speakers will focus on this in some detail. We'll also hear directly today from members of the UAE 94. We're having this conversation here in Geneva during the week that the Human Rights Security Council is sitting, and there is a reason for that. Lawyers, journalists, the international community, this is the time for us to be calling on the UN and those bodies that are able to influence the actions of this group, these nations, these authorities, in order to make a difference and to sort of call out these important issues and essentially do something about them, ensure that this doesn't continue. There have been communications from the UN, so there was one on the 23rd of June of this year, and Fala to my right will speak about that in more detail, but more needs to be done, and this event is really to call on those bodies to do the necessary actions. So I mentioned Sherif, he is our first speaker, and he's here to talk about what can be done and also about his own experiences. So as was mentioned, he is a dual US-Egyptian citizen. He is a former Egyptian army officer, and he's been an outspoken critic of the Egyptian regime. He has a YouTube channel, which I urge everyone to check out. I'm sure he can give us the details. Now, he traveled to Dubai, he'll tell you in more detail himself, towards the end of last year for a family visit, and was detained by the authorities after that visit. He's since been released, and he's here to speak to us today, so I'll hand the floor to him.
Hello. Okay. Hi, thank you for coming today. I'm Sherif Osman, Egyptian American. Been trying to get rid of the Egyptian thing for a while now, but the Egyptian government doesn't want to drop down my citizenship in order to maintain some kind of power over trying to ask for me, because I'm open critic. I was an Air Force captain. I graduated from military academy in '98, became a comm officer. Last places I served was the Cairo West Air Force Base. Before that, I was the Air Force headquarters. After that, I was the Presidential Air Force Base. I saw a lot that I didn't like. I didn't want to be part of that. I saw that we're all being enslaved by one big master, which is a president in a dictatorship. There is no decent way to quit my job. There is no decent way to resign from the military. It's considered an owned property by the government until they decide to release. So my only chance was going through exams, traveling abroad to do studies overseas and not come back. I went once in America. First time to America was in 2002, came back, made my decision by 2003. 2004, I was back again in another course, and I decided to desert as the only way out of that messed up country. Let's run forward with that. I've been a critic in opposition in my very, very small circle. Arabic Spring happened. I spoke out against the military. Egyptians were totally fooled into the idea that the army has supported the revolution and all that, not knowing that they actually have to do the revolution against the military regime, not just the tip of the iceberg at that time, which was Mubarak. I spoke out. I was criticized on TVs. They put their generals tearing me apart, defamation all day long. And by the reach of El-Sisi to power, I decided to just pull back. It's not worth it. It's another military regime. People are not ready with all the information. Went back to school. I did about 5 years at University of Texas in San Antonio, finishing my accounting degree. Again in 2019, I graduated finding Muhammad Ali, which is a former contractor with the military, being a whistleblower and speaking out against the military. And at that time, I had a very, very strong case in my hand, which was the submarines that Egypt purchased worth billions of dollars, and it involved the Israeli Prime Minister cousin, who owns the raw materials that the Egyptians were using to build those, or the Germans were using to build those to the Egyptians. Of course, there was a lot of problem in Israel regarding that. Everything is hushed down in Egypt as normal. I started being critic again. I was part of a formation. We decided to do some political activity in 2020, inviting people into a political move that can run in few years against El-Sisi in the next presidential elections. But we faced the fact of funds and asking for funds from America that would be using foreign funds to try to bring down the government. So it was not the best idea, nor we had the time and the money to keep going. So we decided to end that in 21. Let's go back a little bit. I've been going to Dubai back and forth since 2014. I went there about 7-8 times, one time of which I was there for 8 months. Last visits to Dubai was 2016, 2019, 2020, and 2022 will be my last. According to what the persecutor, the chief of Interpol persecutor in Dubai, who spoke to me 2 days after my kidnap from the street, I was told that I have a written notice, Interpol written notice, which Interpol denied by the end of the month. So I was there, I don't know under what law. We have a serious problem on top of the AIMC right now, which is the Interpol under an Arabic non-democratic president. A president of the Interpol right now is a corrupted police officer, according to the cases that is held against him in court right now in England. He has a history of torture and violation of human rights. I don't know why United Arab Emirates try to pour so many donations towards the foundation of the Interpol. Basically, it's the front body that accepts Interpol donations. According to the records, United Arab Emirates had poured so much money the 3 years prior to the election of that corrupted officer who became the president of the Interpol. And now the Interpol, on top of the AIMC, is being used as a tool in the hands of dictatorships to go after individuals with different narrative or opponents who are not on the same page of the rulers. We have Ahmed Arisi. I don't know why is he still the president up till today. He needs to step down immediately and unconditionally. He has been not conducting properly as the president of the Interpol, and he's gonna bring immediate shame to their faces all over the world. I'm not gonna be quiet about it. I'm not gonna be hushed about it. Before I didn't talk much about the Emiratis because my sister lives in Dubai, but now we're no longer brother and sister. I lost her to the ordeal that I went through. She was fearing for her family, fearing for herself, and by the time I was out of jail, she had already moved on with her mind and emotions, and not even knowing how many days I was jailed for. She was already busy with her life, so I really don't have anything to worry about now in the Emirates. I can speak out freely, not worrying about any family member to be touched, because I don't have any family members as for the time being. We have two huge problems right now, AIMC and Interpol. Both are led by Arabic presidents. The AIMC since 2001 has been the same Saudi president as part of his control of the AIMC. Recently, AIMC has been acting very irresponsibly, attacking individuals all over the Arabic nations, 22 countries. The Arabic League had a meeting last month, 22 countries, 22 leaders standing on a stage, none of which are democratically elected. We should not tolerate the elections of any officer coming from a non-democratic state to lead an international body as important as the Interpol. Interpol can be a very, very useful tool if it's actually used in the right place, targeting criminals, money laundering, drug cartels, weapon industry who are running illegally. But at the same time, under a new Arabic president, it's now targeting individuals. I was kidnapped from the street among my family, leaving them helpless, not understanding what just happened before their eyes. My fiancée is from Finland, in a country that don't have really political issues to be an activist in any direction. It's all up to you because it's a democratic country. She'd never been to the Middle East before. She's never been in touch with a culture before. And that was the first time I was taking her to introduce her to my family before we get married, as we've been together already for a couple of years. So they stopped in Egypt, my mom, from traveling. I arrived to Dubai on November 4th. My mom was stopped from traveling on November 5th. My mom is a 72-year-old retired general doctor who is a veteran, disabled veteran, in a wheelchair. 72-year-old lady was pushed outside of the airport, denying her her right of transportation, which is one of the human natural rights. The day after, I was arrested on the 6th, and not really arrested, I was kidnapped. My phone was taken away from me. I was not allowed the right to speak to a lawyer, to the embassy, to my family, none of the above. Just thrown into the headquarters detention center, police, the Dubai police headquarters detention center. When they took me in, they put me at an Interpol room. 3 men on Sunday, which is a day off, 3 men working on their computers, struggling with messages coming to them on WhatsApp, including my picture, which I saw as they were scrolling ups and downs. 2.5 hours cooking my case in front of me before I was told that there is an Interpol case against me. I was not allowed to talk to my family, to a lawyer, to the US Embassy or the consulate services. I was not allowed any connection with anyone for 2 days. On Tuesday, I met with a Dubai Interpol chief prosecutor. His name is Madani, Ismail Madani, who blocked me, told me in my face that I have a red notice on me at from the Interpol. This meeting was over Skype video meeting, and it's recorded. So there is a record of that. If they fear that I'm lying or anything, I'm giving them the legal rights to put out this video to public to try to, show how liar I am. Any try to tempt that will be faced in a very strong manner. So he told me straight in my face that I have an Interpol case, and I told him that's impossible. He said that Egypt has a warrant on me based on a case that it's on me since, 2019. And I told him that I haven't been to Egypt since 2004, so how come the Interpol should not be a political tool by any chance against the Egyptian regime? So if they're gonna use the Interpol should only be for crimes. I didn't know anything about transnational repression at the point. I decided that I was fighting back and forth with him about the right of the Interpol actually to stop me, but he insisted on having what it takes to lock me up. We got into the communication. He was very respectful, but at the same time, I didn't like the whole narrative. He's lying to me bluntly in my face, telling me that I have a case, and that the word Interpol was very, very respected in my eyes before that day. I always looked at the Interpol as a very cool tool of going after bad people, and I think last movie I watched that had Interpol was Lucy. And had that case of an Interpol cop going around with an alien and all that good stuff. So it was, a fantasy world to me that Interpol is a very useful tool, very good people, but not under a non-democratic police officer to be on top of it. I don't know what compromises is the West given to the Arabs. I don't know what is going on. Donations should not be used in a way to twist laws and regulations. This will threaten all of us, and that's going to happen in the near future, because what is happening to me was impossible 5 years ago. So let's go back to the story. I was in that discussion with the chief of the Interpol, and then I was given case number 138-2022 Interpol case. They took me straight from that room. I was put in a police vehicle. They moved me to Dubai Central Jail, and they gave me my stuff that was checked in at the headquarters to check it in again in jail while I'm changing my clothes that I was taken from the street into the jail outfit, and I found my cell phone in my hand. Of course, I had the roaming service because I don't trust putting an Emirati network in my phone because that's a straight spy on my phone. They have very bad history of using technology into spying on their political opponents. At that point, in my opinion, it was very hard for me to trust that, so I decided to turn on my phone while I'm changing my clothes. I put out a message to very good people, one of which was my fiancée, my sister, and my friend, and then one of my best friends is a former national officer from Egypt who actually is in the United States as well. He's a PhD in law. Once he heard about the news, once he heard the news online, the second day he was in DC meeting with his VIP friends that he knows out there. My friends started putting out the word on the internet. Luckily, I had very arranged campaign by very smart people, including Hisham and my fiancée, who was the front lady for this whole campaign. Everybody was talking to her. Everybody wanted to help her out. She found herself helpless, but at the same time, so many good people were involved in that fight. At that point, just 1 second, let me bring up my screen here. Okay, so between the Interpol and Arabic Interpol, when the Emirati president came to, the Emirati president of the Interpol came to power, he said that the safety and security of Dubai has been something that they are very recognized with, and how safe and peaceful it is, and he will be able to bring that experience to the Interpol to make it a better organization. I don't believe that. I believe the Interpol, in my opinion, is being used as a tool of transnational repression. We are experiencing illegal and out of control activities by police states and non-democratic states that can be elevated to the stage of terrorism, straightforward terrorism, to hush people, to arrest people, to kidnap people, to kill people, to threaten people by their family members, doing whatever it takes to hush us down. Why? Because their most threat is the media, the press, what you guys are doing. When you put their names out with what they do, that's what scares them the most. 3 officials came to release me from jail. In 45-minute conversation, the word media was mentioned 4 times, 3 to 4 times. It is all about, we're not gonna do to you like what the media says. We're not gonna compliment you in a transaction with El-Sisi to complement your life in exchange for favors or business. We know that we are good allies with Egypt, but that doesn't mean we're gonna turn you in, blah, 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 like what the media says. So the word media was mentioned so many times in a manner that it shows how important to us to expose them. After I was taken to jail, 46 days, nobody to talk to. So many things, so many games are being played. Friends and family going after the Interpol. Mina writes, so many other people were communicating with the Interpol until the Interpol, close to the end of November, released a note that says, well, we have nothing between Interpol and Sherif. That night was the most horrible night in my life because my fiancée talked to me on the phone and told me, hey, I have good news. There's nothing between you and the Interpol. They should release you anytime soon. I'm like, I'm not gonna be released. At this point, I'm officially kidnapped. I'm not gonna be released. And it actually took almost a month after that day to release me. But at that time, it seems like there is a lot of sync happening between AIMC and Interpol. They are working in harmony. There is the upper hand that can flip an Interpol case to an AIMC case overnight without further notice. I would not mention or didn't even hear about the AIMC until the end of November while I was in Dubai jail.
Sherif, thank you so much. Just a couple more minutes, a minute or so to wrap up, I think.
Okay, so as a wrap-up, what we need to do to resolve this, in my own opinion, first of all, Al-Raisi needs to step down immediately and unconditionally. He should not be in that office. He should not be positioned that place from the beginning. He is a disgrace to anybody that will be attached with his name currently and in the near future even more. If you want to reform that, there should not be a police officer from a non-democratic state to become the president of the Interpol again. There are so many countries that are democratic with reputable, police officers who have no torture history on their sheet. And the way to do this is to only elect presidents to the Interpol and similar organizations only from democratic countries. None of the Middle Eastern countries, none of the Arabic countries should be part of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherif, for your comments and for expressing the urgency of these issues and also showing the personal effect that it can have on an individual. I think often, as lawyers, as practitioners in this space, we focus a lot on what can be done, what can be said to the authorities, writing documents, but we need to remember the personal and human impact of these activities as well. Having said that, we also need to think about the legal underpinnings. As a lawyer myself, I'm very interested in understanding that. So we have here today Fala Syed from the MENA Rights Group to talk to us a little bit more about AIMC, the structure, the legal underpinnings, and she'll speak for about 10 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anissa, and thank you so much for the Swiss Press Club. Is it working or? Yeah, okay. And thank you so much for the Swiss Press Club for hosting us. I'm very honored to be part of this this panel. And thank you to Sherif for your warm testimony. Yeah, for my part, I will give you more of a legal background of the AIMC, from more of a legal perspective. On what basis it operates, what is its mandate, and its operational, like how it operates, and then talk about maybe the case of Hassan al-Rabia, who was also a victim of this system. And then I'll just end my intervention with going over some important points that were made with the communication that you briefly touched upon. From the Special Rapporteur on counterterrorism. So yeah, the AIMC is a specialized ministerial council of the League of Arab States, and the goal of this council is to allow Arab states to cooperate jointly when it comes to everything that's security and prevention of crime. And it's basically acting as a link in matters of judicial assistance. And the main way they basically cooperate with each other is by issuing arrest warrants, issuing and circulating arrest warrants against individual at the request of any state of the Arab League, which is quite disturbing actually. And this mechanism is actually something that we've only recently had to deal with, so we've never really had to look at it before. I don't know, for some reason the international community is only just now figuring out how it works and on what basis it operates and what is the actual nature of this mechanism. So even the information that we have now and that we will be discussing is not even the full picture. Where we don't even have, the extent of the information we have is very lacking compared to what it is actually. So maybe as a first step, the AIMC's legal basis and the sort of constitutive acts, somehow, I don't want to use the word constitutive acts because it's a legal word that is described only for international organizations, and we're not even sure what is the nature of the AIMC, whether it's a body of an international organization. If it's not, we don't even know. But the AIMC is based on, first of all, the Basic Laws, which was signed in 1982. And the main problem of this law is actually that it does not make any reference to any human rights standard. It does not grant individuals the right to file an access request or to demand the removal of arrest warrants that was circulated against them. And it does not mention standards of procedures regarding the circulation of arrest warrants, or obviously any human rights standard. And another law that the AIMC is based on is the Riyadh Arab Agreement for Judicial Cooperation, which was adopted and endorsed in 1983. And the most important thing is that it foresees the recognition and enforcement of foreign judgments, and it provides a framework for extradition. So basically like a framework to facilitate extradition between these states that are part of the AIMC. And obviously, and reasonably, there has to be some exceptions to extradition. For instance, in the cases of refoulement, etc., extradition should not be carried out. So this is actually foreseen in Article 41 of the Riyadh Agreement, because it prohibits the extradition of political offenses. It excludes political offenses. Obviously, the practice is very different from the theory, as we'll be seeing. And what also makes it another framework on which the AIMC is based, and it kind of makes it even harder to determine the real nature of the AIMC, is the Arab Convention on the Suppression of Terrorism. So this convention was adopted by the AIMC and the Council of Arab Ministers in 1998 as a component of the AIMC's strategy against terrorism. And the implementation of this Arab Convention is monitored by the AIMC. And the Arab Convention gives a definition of terrorism, which has been set by the Special Rapporteur. It has been recognized internationally as quite a vague and broad definition that can, if applied, can infringe on rights of freedom of expression and other human rights. So yeah, I mean, this convention, similarly to the Riyadh Agreement, it also deals with extradition. And importantly, in Article 6A, there's a prohibition of extradition for offenses, and I'm quoting here, regarded as having a political nature under the laws in force in the requested states. Of course, this is just a theory. There's also Article 2B, which excludes from these offenses a list of conducts, such as attacks on heads of states and destruction of public property, as well as all acts falling within the scope of the Convention's definition of terrorism. So this is just the legal framework on which the AIMC is based. I'll briefly talk about the mandate if the time is all right. The AIMC, aims to develop and strengthen cooperation, as I said, and yeah, basically on an operational level, it's more of it's just this mechanism that is made to circulate and issue arrest warrants against any individual that's requested by a state. So basically, when we have a wanted person who has not been arrested and their whereabouts are unknown, the state in which the person is wanted can file a request to the AIMC. And then the AIMC can transmit the state's arrest warrant to all Arab League members and yeah, just amplify its effectiveness and the likelihood of apprehending the wanted person. So it's not really clear how the AIMC decides to circulate an arrest warrant and whether it does so systematically. It's not even sure when states can ask for an arrest warrant to be circulated and whether they can do it for all kinds of crimes. We don't know what are the actual obligations of the states when it comes to an arrest warrant, or whether they have to proactively go and search for this person, or whether, whether they are actually bound by it, whether if they found this person, they have an obligation to extradite them. But in any case, you know, the cases we've dealt with are very different and very tricky because some of them were extradited on the basis of a domestic judge's decision. Some of them were not. We have the case of Sherif was just, you know, released out of nowhere, who was arrested out of nowhere, no judge's intervention. We don't really, it's kind of, everything is a bit, we don't really know. We don't have any framework, any legal framework under which it operated in the case of Sherif. So I don't know how much time do I have left.
Maybe a minute or so to wrap up.
Okay, so I think I'm just gonna wrap up and just criticize a little bit the legal framework as I talked about it, and then I'd be very happy, you know, in the Q&A to touch on the communication of the SRCT. But yeah, I mean, this broad definition, obviously, of the Arab Convention is very dangerous because it leads to the criminalization of acts of freedoms of expression. There is a restrictive interpretation of political offenses, which is found in the mentioned conventions, and it enables the AIMC to trigger the extradition of individuals on political grounds, which is obviously inconsistent with human rights. And you know, as demonstrated through the cases of Sherif Osman, and as we will see with Rumaisi, the AIMC systems are being used to actually persecute peaceful political activists and persecuted minority members, putting them at risk of torture and other human rights violations in the requesting state. And one last very important thing that I really want to stress is that there's actually no review mechanism or a mechanism that will allow those who are, entre guillemets, flagged to contest their arrest warrant. So it's not like in Interpol where we have a commission on like a form that we can, like, it's basically when someone has a red notice in Interpol, you can just go on their website. There's a form that it's a very simple form. You don't need to be an expert to do it. You just have to like put the form, it's something that's made for people who are red flagged and red noticed to just contest this. This is not something that exists in AIMC context. So I found this very shocking and just left very vulnerable.
Thank you. And I don't want to keep reiterating this, but as a lawyer, the lack of a review mechanism to me is similarly shocking and, again, something which needs to be changed. Fala, thank you so much for your comments. And I think what we're seeing from that is the lack of transparency in this system, and essentially the world, states, nations need to know more about the AIMC, how it's working. We've mentioned the UAE 94, and I'd now like to call upon our third speaker, Hamad Al-Shamsi, who joins us by video link today. And I'm looking up at myself to see if it's suddenly merged into Hamad's face, but I'm sure that will happen shortly. He is the executive director of an organization called EDAC, which deals with detentions in the UAE and sort of in the UAE. And he'll talk to us about that in more detail, but he'll also tell us about his own experiences as a member of the UAE 94. He has about 10 minutes, so I'll hand over to him now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anissa. As you mentioned, my name is Hamad Al-Shamsi, and I work for the Emirates Detainees Advocacy Center. Do you hear me well?
We can in the room, yes. If there's anyone on Zoom who can't hear you for whatever reason, please do say in the chat.
I'll keep going then. Yeah, I'm really honored to speak alongside distinguished speakers. I really wish I had the chance to be in person in Geneva, but hopefully we will have another opportunity in the future. As you mentioned, the UAE 94 case. The UAE 94 case started almost 11 years ago. It all started when there was a petition in 2011. And that petition was calling for a reform. And to be honest with you, I cannot call it a petition. It was like a very polite letter sent by many activists inside the UAE calling for more participation in the decision-making process. And because, as you may be already aware, there is no like any kind of a free election inside the UAE and no inside UAE any kind of parliamentary system. So this petition or this letter was sent by the people, like almost 133. After that, the UAE government started to be very aggressive against anyone would like to speak about any kind of reform inside the UAE or about anything. I mean, even though before 2011, we did not have a lot of freedom inside the UAE, but we have very limited space that we can speak about. But after that petition, that even small space went down, and we have since then almost zero civic space inside the UAE. So you cannot speak about anything inside the UAE that goes in a way against the UAE government wants. Okay, so then almost after the petition, the crackdown started to happen. The first victim was Ahmed Mansour. Then he was released. Then the UAE 94 started. And most of the people in the UAE 94, or all of them actually, are from Al-Islah member, because Al-Islah member was almost like maybe I can say 30% of the signatory of the petition was from Al-Islah member. So the UAE decided to crack down on that civil society. Then they started arresting a lot of people on mass trial and mass scale. And then there was in 2013, a lot of people was sentenced between 7 years to 15 years. I am one of the people who was sentenced in absentia to 15 years in prison back in 2013. Almost maybe it is important to mention this. Now almost the sentences of a lot of people in that case especially, and also in other cases, was already served, but they still in prison beyond their sentences. Just very recently, Human Rights Watch reported that 51 prisoners of conscience in prison beyond their sentence, and also the working group in arbitrary detention, like in the UN, they also adopted an opinion about 12 prisoners of conscience in that case that being held beyond their sentences inside the prisons. This is about the almost very brief about UAE 94. I believe that there are a lot of resources can speak about this case specifically. I also would like to mention, since you are talking about the Interpol and the Arab Interpol, I think the talk about the Arab Interpol just started recently because of the case of Khalaf al-Rumaythi. And Khalaf al-Rumaythi, I consider him as a friend because actually we used to live in the same country. He was one of the UAE 94. I did not know him actually when he was in the UAE or when we were in the UAE, but I just knew him when we came outside the UAE in 2013. So Khalaf al-Rumaythi was sentenced to absentia to 15 years, and he was living his normal life. He was actually concerned about his own business and raising his family and his children until just very recently when he decided to go to Amman to look for a school for his children. But unfortunately, he was stopped at the airport, and the airport officer recognized him by his eye print. They scanned his eye, and they knew that this Khalaf al-Rumaythi, that the guy who was wanted by the UAE, and then just almost in a week, he was sent back to the UAE without any judicial procedures inside Jordan. So Khalaf al-Rumaythi is a victim of this mechanism, the Interpol mechanism. But also there is another mechanism. I don't think there is a lot of attention on that mechanism, which we call, or it is called actually, the Gulf Police. There is also a Gulf Police mechanism currently in place, and the headquarters of the Gulf Police is in Abu Dhabi. And there are a lot of victims of the Gulf Police currently, like we have experiencing in the last 10 years. And I would like to give some, and also there is an agreement, it's called Gulf Security Agreement, that regulate this Gulf Police mechanism tool. And there were a lot of victims to that mechanism in the past also 10 years. And I would like to mention just very shortly, very briefly, some examples here. And one of the victims I would like to mention is Dr. Mohammed Al-Hudayf. Mohammed Al-Hudayf is like, he's very he's very social media activist in Saudi Arabia. He was very critical of the UAE. And in 2016, based on a request from the UAE, he was detained in Saudi Arabia, and then he was sentenced to 5 years in prison, plus an extra 5 year on travel ban, on charge of insulting a friendly country. And I believe what happened in here is because of that. If we can go into details of that agreement, we will find that this agreement can give a country a right to attack people beyond its border in the Gulf region. Mohammed Al-Hudayf was not the only one. Lujain Al-Hadloul, most likely all of you heard of her case. Lujain Al-Hadloul was kidnapped in UAE based on that agreement, and she was sent back to the Saudi Arabia. Lujain Al-Hadloul is not a criminal. She did not do anything wrong, but she is like a social, civil society activist. So the problem that we are facing, if I can mention this, the problem that, maybe there is something I need to mention here. We normally do not, maybe also Mr. Sherif also mentioned this. We do not deny the importance of this mechanism. Like we know that Interpol, Arab Interpol, Gulf police, these kind of mechanism is very important if it is going to be used in the right way. But unfortunately, it has been misused a lot in the past 10 years. The normal goal, objectives of this mechanism is to crack down on criminals, money laundering, weapon smuggling, stuff like that. But unfortunately, these regimes or countries or governments has been misusing this mechanism to crack down on the social and the civil society. And also crashing, destroying totally the civic space on these countries. I think I consumed my time, but I would like to just conclude with one more important. Why do we we do not have a trust on these mechanisms? I think there are two reasons. The main reason is that these governments has long history in misusing this mechanism. So as we mentioned just minutes ago. And the second thing, and it is a cause and a result in the same time, that this government is not elected by the people. They do not represent the people. So they are using or misusing this mechanism for their favor. So they trying to protect the government, not to protect the freedom of the people, not to protect the civil societies, not to protect the civic space. So they are using these things to protect the government, their own people, their own personals, not the freedom of the people. And that's also another reason we do not have a trust on these mechanisms. I think the main solution to this, if we do have democratic countries or regimes that are represented by the people, I think we will not face such problems. But since we do not have this, we, at least in the future, we hope to have such represented government to protect the life and the freedom of the people. I will stop here, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have.
Thank you very much for your comments, Ahmad. We're now moving on to our final speaker, but you'll have heard the reference to questions, and I just want to get everyone's brains ticking whilst she speaks. So we do have some time for questions and answers afterwards. We've in fact already got some, so you'll have to get them in quickly to get heard. Again, just encouraging everybody to get their questions ready. Please type them in the chat, and we'll turn to them after the speakers. But now turning to our fourth, but definitely not last speaker, we've got Ida, who is Al-Ramaithi's legal advocate. So we've heard a little bit about his case already, and she'll now tell us a little bit more about that and some of her other cases.
Well, thank you, Anissa, and thank you to the organizers, is it better now? Okay. All right, thanks to the organizers, to the Geneva Press Club. It's very good to see everyone who's been able to join here in Geneva, and thank you everyone who's joining online. I'm very glad to be part of this important discussion on the targeting of political opponents and critics who have been living and working permanently abroad, and the methods in which they are being pursued and ultimately extradited. What we've heard today from the discussion and increasingly are seeing reports of. One moment for technical difficulties. Okay. As I was saying, what we've heard today in the discussion and increasingly in reports is that we're seeing a pattern of incidents where critics and political opponents are being arrested and irregularly extradited outside the normal procedure set out to safeguard the extradition procedure and process and to ensure that individuals are not extradited to a place where they will be tortured and potentially disappeared. So I am here to speak specifically about one individual and to tell you a bit more about his case. One person that was recently extradited in an extrajudicial way. This is Dr. Khalaf al-Romaithi, who is a Turkish Emirati dual national and who was first arrested on the 7th of May in Jordan on a UAE arrest warrant and disappeared in Jordanian custody 2 days later. He's now been effectively disappeared in the UAE for over 2 months with no information on his location, his well-being, his status, or even on the very basic and fundamental details on how he was extradited to the UAE. I was instructed by Dr. al-Romaithi's family to act as his international counsel and to raise his situation before the UN. And to start, I do want to clarify, as we're talking today about methods in which political opponents are targeted and extradited, and particularly when we're talking about it in the context of the Arab Interior Minister's Council, that for Dr. Romaithi's case, it's a situation where it's been a complete informational void in which about his extradition and how it took place. And there's been a complete failure and refusal by either Jordan or the UAE to provide information on how it took place, the means of how it happened, and where he is. And so it's unclear whether or not, because of this, his extradition took place by way of the Arab Interior Minister's Council. But what is clear is that the repressive and secretive manner in which it was undertaken is emblematic of what many political opponents and critics are facing, and which is becoming a concerningly reoccurring practice. Therefore, I'm speaking today to raise awareness about his ever worrisome and dire situation and to call for urgent action by the international community, including the UN, to demand answers for his case specifically, and also about the trend of abusive and secretive extraditions aimed at curbing free and peaceful expression, which are contrary to international law. So let me tell you a bit more about the events that happened to Dr. al-Romaithi. You've already heard a bit from Hamad, but I'll just tell a bit more detail. Dr. al-Romaithi is a businessman who lived and worked in Turkey with his family and has been living there for over a decade. He is also known as a critic of the UAE government and has exercised his right to free expression, and thereafter sought safety with his family in Turkey due to these activities. He was pursued by the UAE for his political expressions and associations by way of the mass trial that you heard of, the UAE 94 mass trial of nearly 100 political opponents who were tried in 2013. Now, just to give a little bit more information about this trial, the UAE 94 trial has been widely denounced as unsound by a coalition of leading international human rights organizations, including Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, FIDH, and a few other organizations as well. And this was due to the gross violations of fair trial standards. The mass trial and resulting convictions, which included Dr. al-Ramaithi, were widely recognized as a crackdown on dissent and criticism in the UAE and an attack on the right to free expression and association. Dr. al-Ramaithi was tried and convicted in absentia, and as we know, this is a procedure which we have to remember can only be carried out to do an in absentia proceeding under international law. It must be carried out with strict fair trial assurances. Yet the trial as a whole was marred by reports of gross unfair procedure and denial of due process rights. And just to name a few, this included the denial of legal assistance, denial of the ability to appeal the trial verdict, prolonged incommunicado detention, denial of the right to a public hearing and to prepare and present a defense case. I think most importantly are allegations of torture and serious misconduct in detention, which went unanswered when they were reported to the court, and other abusive treatments in detention as well. The coalition of human rights organizations that monitored the trial described it as blatant unfairness. It was described as politically motivated and marred even before it started by violations to fair trial standards. And this was the mass unfair trial and conviction for which the UAE based its extradition request. Like many others among this pattern of repressive extraditions, Dr. al-Ramaithi was pursued and ultimately extradited for his political activities and for exercising free speech. As you heard before, he traveled to Jordan on the 7th of May, and this was in order to look for a school for his son. He was arrested at the airport, was released on bail the same day, but then was rearrested the next day on the 8th of May. He did appear in court the day after that, on the 9th of May, where he was represented by local Jordanian counsel, and a copy of the extradition request was presented. At that time, there was an extradition hearing that was set for a week later on the 16th of May, but he would never make it to that hearing. The hearing on the 9th of May was the last time that Dr. al-Ramaithi's family or lawyers saw or spoke to him. Dr. al-Ramaithi was not produced in court by the Jordanian authorities for the scheduled hearing on the 16th of May, and his lawyers were unable to, and have been since, unable to access him, speak to him, or even know his current location. After Dr. al-Ramaithi's disappearance on the 9th of May, his family received unconfirmed and very conflicting reports that made it even more unclear to them. They heard things like he was still detained and present in Jordan, or that a judge in Amman had refused the extradition. And then there were also unconfirmed reports that Jordan had sent him to the UAE on a private plane outside the normal procedure. Indeed, flight data of an airport next to Marka prison where he was held notes a flight arriving from the UAE, then returning 30 minutes later to the UAE. Of course, none of this has been confirmed. This is, as I said before, been an informational void. Jordan and the UAE have not confirmed any of this. So it's left the family in a situation where they're wondering about answers, having to look for it themselves, and being left with little that they can do to help him and help protect his rights. The only known response from Jordan was given as about Dr. al-Ramaithi's situation just last week, after an MP in Jordan raised questions in May about the extradition procedure and how this could have been done outside of normal legal procedures. And the response from the Ministry of Justice in Jordan included just one line about Dr. al-Ramaithi. It said, "No extradition request was received from the Ministry of Justice concerning the citizen Khalaf al-Ramaithi to date." And that's all that's been said by either Jordan or the UAE. So notably, this leaves almost all questions still unanswered and continues to leave his family completely in the dark about his fate. His family and his local lawyers still have no communication, no notification at all that he has been extradited, by Jordan or the UAE confirming this, or how he was extradited, or where he is, and whether his rights are being protected in the UAE. Now, as for legal steps that have been taken, on the 18th of May, a communication was sent to UN special rapporteurs and it set out the facts of his situation and also the real risk that his life and well-being are at risk, noting the fact that his co-accused in the UAE 94 trial had been abused themselves, and there were allegations of torture that were unanswered, raising the risk and creating a real risk that he was going to suffer the same treatment. It asked special rapporteurs to urgently seek information about his status and to raise his rights, and also to address the violations of his rights by virtue of sending him to the UAE. The complaint raised that because he was arrested and held in Jordan in the custody of the Jordanian authorities, his treatment must abide by Jordan's obligations under international law, and it also addressed the UAE's obligations upon receiving him. And just to name a few of the rights that were raised, the right against enforced disappearances, noting that no one has seen or spoken to him or even knows his location since the 9th of May, over 2 months ago. It also raised the right to a fair trial, and by extension, the right to free expression and association. And importantly, recalled that the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention reviewed the UAE 94 case, which caused Dr. al-Romethi's extradition, and concluded that the trial had such grave fair trial violations that a fair trial was not possible, and also that the convictions were based on charges of acts that would fall under the rights of freedom of expression and assembly, so confirming those facts. And very importantly, also saying that expressing criticism to one's countries and its leaders and communicating to other political actors in a peaceful way should not be categorized as an attempt to overthrow a government. And then lastly, it raised the right against torture, again, referring to the fact that Dr. al-Romethi's co-accused did suffer such treatment, and therefore he was at high risk of suffering that himself. As a matter of fact, in the 2 months since he's been there, there is the risk that he's already faced that treatment. So while the UN special rapporteurs have been alerted to his situation, and his case has also been raised before, the Working Group on Enforced Disappearances, more must be done to quickly get answers and ensure protection of the person that is subjected to this treatment. In the 2 months since his disappearance, I need to just emphasize again that in this time, it's completely possible that he could be tortured, that this strong evidence that there is this risk could be now the reality. I'm very glad to see that the group of special rapporteurs and a member of the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention took a strong stance in a communication to the Arab League and expressed concerns about actions that were taken in these extraditions, particularly by the Arab Interior Ministers' Council, which seemed to be in violation of international principles and protections, and they named a few, including non-refoulement, non-discrimination, due diligence, fair trials, and also right to free opinion and expression. So I'm glad to see that this is being questioned, it's being probed, and the answers are being demanded. But building on this, I ask that UN mandate holders and the international media and international community not only press for answers on the overall pattern and procedure used by these states, but also for the individuals who are being impacted currently and facing situations of enforced disappearance, of incommunicado detention, of torture even. These individual cases must be addressed with urgency and priority, not only to get answers about how and why they are happening, but to protect against and prevent serious human rights violations from resulting and having more that are resulting as a consequence of these extraditions. It's been surprising and very worrying that even though it's been 2 months since Dr. al-Romethi has been extradited to the UAE, there hasn't been more pressure and demands to have Jordan and the UAE answer questions, just basic, fundamental questions about how this happened and where he is and whether his rights are being protected. And I think I'll end by just saying that there just needs to be action to help protect these individuals concurrently while they're vulnerable to these human rights violations. And I do hope that we can see some movement going forward on getting answers and ensuring protection. I'll pause there.
I have one question before you pass the... I just have one question before you pass the mic over. Since you mentioned that he's Turkish citizen, what is the position of Turkey on his case?
I'll just answer quickly. There have been letters that have been written to the Turkish government asking for any information they have on behalf of the family so that the family can be updated. There haven't been an answer to those letters. One detail is that he did attend the Turkish embassy after his, as I mentioned before, he was arrested on the 7th of May, released, and then rearrested on the 8th of May. He attended the Turkish embassy on the 7th with worry about his situation, and unfortunately wasn't assisted in a way that helped protect against what ultimately did happen. So I do hope that there are more communications by the Turkish government with his family and to help protect him.
Thank you so much for those comments, Ida. And I'm not sure that there's much I can do save to echo that call for the UN international bodies to really get more information. We have this informational void and this total lack of transparency. And that is one of the purposes of this event today, to call on the international media, to call on those who are able to speak to the relevant authorities, speak to their governments, and really put pressure on. We need to know more, essentially. We now have some time for questions and answers. I'll start with a very quick one to Fala, and that is, apologies, technical difficulties. You mentioned a communication to the Arab League with regards to the AIMC, and I just wondered if you could tell the floor a little bit more about that.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for your question, Anissa. Actually, so basically, the Special Rapporteur on Counterterrorism sent a communication to the Arab League, reminding the Arab League and the member states of the Arab League of their human rights obligations. And they've also asked them to provide more information on certain issues. As I told you, everything is very shady around this mechanism, so the more information we have, the better. Maybe I can just highlight a few things that I think were important in this communication. First of all, this communication gave us the information that there was measures to facilitate the tracking and the apprehension of wanted individual that have been introduced by the AIMC. And subsequently, there was a list of criteria that was prepared by the legal committee for criminal prosecution of the AIMC. And based on these criteria, there was a database of wanted person in member states that was actually compiled, including 4 terrorism-related offenses. And search warrants were issued through national communication divisions. And yeah, that's one of the information that we found out with this communication. There's also a procedures of circulation of arrest and search warrants that's issued by member states of the Arab League. And these procedures actually, it has been recognized by the Special Rapporteur as lacking precision for the underlying legal offenses, and they basically criminalize acts which are indeed protected by human rights law standards. And it has also, so briefly during my intervention I touched upon the exceptions that were that were provided by the Riyadh Agreement and the Arab Convention. And I mean, for political offenses, etc. And the Special Rapporteur recognized that these exceptions infringe on fundamental human rights and freedoms, because actually the treaties, they merely describe acts that are not considered to be of political nature, and they basically lack any definition of the offenses of political nature, which are exempted from the extradition obligation. And I've also briefly touched upon it during my intervention, but regarding the provision that's about attacks against head of states, their families, and the government, the Special Rapporteur also said that experience has showed us that criminal defamation laws, as such, they're often used against journalists, political opponents, human rights defenders, and others who are critical of government officials and policies. And yeah, I mean, maybe just one last thing is that it's also it's worth noting, I think, that the normative framework that I've touched upon before is actually silent on anything that's pertaining to the cases of refoulement, and I wanted to talk about this case of Hassan al-Rabia, who's a Saudi national and who was extradited from Morocco to Saudi Arabia, and basically on the basis of an arrest warrant that was issued by the AIMC, and the principle of non-refoulement was not at all taken into consideration, because if he would be sent back to Saudi Arabia, he would be tortured and subjected to other ill treatments. Now he has been sent back, unfortunately. It's quite a tragic case. So yeah, I think that the fact that it's silent that the conventions are silent on issues of refoulement is also, puts individuals in such a vulnerable place.
Thank you, and I think we are seeing just how many individuals are already affected by this, and how this is becoming an increasingly urgent issue, which is only going to affect more. I have here a question from Dania Akkad for Sherif. And Sherif, that question is, I wondered if you could expand on your comment that the AIMC and Interpol are working in harmony. What do you mean by that? Can you offer any more details about why you believe that? And is it clear to you at this point which body triggered your arrest? I think we have a couple of minutes for that question.
So she wants an explanation on how they work in harmony together? Like, she wants further explanation on how they can work in harmony together?
Sorry, I think we're experiencing some technical difficulties with mics. Yes, essentially, can you offer any more details about why you think that's the case?
Of course. In my opinion, and from my own experience, first-hand experience, nobody told me about it. It's part of my life now that I lived as the old Sherif, since I'm a PTSD right now after such an experience. It all started as Interpol case. My case was never an AIMC case. I was never told anything about the AIMC. Interpol case is how it started like, is what they told me, is where they mugshot me was at the Interpol headquarters main office with a big logo, just like the one behind me back, but taking the whole wall, and it says Interpol headquarters, Dubai division, or something like that. I can't remember the exact, because my head was all over the place, shattered from the news that I kept being hammered with for the 3 hours prior to that event. So when we put the lights on, when the media started talking about my case, the biggest media outlet was very surprising to me. It was Jerusalem Post out of Israel that were actually taking my position and trying to defend my position. I didn't see that coming, as Israel is very allies with Emirates and all that, but they have a better rights when it comes to freedom of expression or speech in their press and their news, and that's how we know much more about our original countries is through their actual media. I'm not saying that I'm adapting to everything they say, but I'm just saying that they have what is more than just political to write down. So when that came out, and then after that, bigger media, Wall Street Journal and bigger media started jumping in, and then at that point, until the end of November, it was all bluntly Interpol case. At some point, that's when the Interpol stepped back and said, oh, no, this is not an Interpol. We don't have anything with Sherif. But that didn't come from Interpol of Dubai. That came from Interpol headquarters in Lyon, France. So at that point, that's when I knew that I was kidnapped. The second day, when they questioned the same prosecutor about my status, and he's like, oh, that's an AIMC case. So now we're looking at two Arabs on top of police organizations working together in harmony to arrest individuals who have a different narrative than their leaders and try to bring him in jail. It doesn't matter what where you're at, what you're doing, what your life is like. They don't care about families, don't care about tearing down families or killing people or throwing people in jails. There are tens of thousands of Egyptians in jail right now, and nobody's taking care of them. Nobody can help them out. Even Ala, who's a British citizen, the British government have been pushing and pushing for the past couple of years for his immediate release due to the lack of anything regarding his detention for 9 years. Yet it is still not working. As of today, as I'm speaking right now, the Turkish government, that's why I asked the nice lady sitting next to me right now about what is Turkey doing to the Turkey citizen. Turkey government right now has been arresting individual Egyptians who are not part of a political group or an Islamic political group or a political organization, has been has been arresting and targeting them, putting them in jails to complement the visit of Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the dictatorship of Egypt, visit to Turkey on July 27th. For this time, Turkey is not doing anything except arresting all the opposition that is not under control and not part of any political group, has nobody to fight for. Their families are left behind. They don't know what's going on, nobody to defend the rights. And this is what Turkey is doing right now with Egyptians. For what happened in Dubai, it will not stay in Dubai. My case miraculously changed from Interpol to AIMC. Both of them are given political covers, in my opinion, to inappropriate and out of control terrorist activities by member countries, conducted by member countries under the political cover of Interpol, with the Arabic president on top of it, who has history of torture and misuse of power. Now the Interpol is out of control organization. Watch out. They went after us in our own countries. Now all the opposition in our original countries are in jail. They are done with those guys. Now they're looking at us outside of their territories and jurisdiction to target us and arrest us and bring us to the bottomless jails. Next, it's gonna be you guys. It's gonna be you in the West. It's gonna be you in Europe and America. You're gonna be a reporter. You're gonna be arrested in the Arabic nations, and it's gonna be with the same claims that we have now. But because you decided to quiet and hush and make good money at your press without talking about that and bringing it up, you're gonna be next. So this is a warning, a shout out, and we're doing it out of Geneva, out of the press club here.
Thank you, Sherif. We have now a question in Arabic, and I don't want to essentially embarrass myself with my poor pronunciation, but we also have a question in English, so I'll ask that one, and if the person who's put the question in Arabic could translate it into the chat, that would be great. We have about 5 minutes left, so I think just those two questions. So we have, this question doesn't have a name, but it says, is there any opportunity for cooperation of Arab opponents abroad? I think that is probably a question for Sherif. Perhaps we could limit the answer to about a minute or two.
It's not going to take long. I don't think it's a good idea. I think the best thing is, based on my own experience, don't be individual working groups, work under organization, have registered organization in the country that you're residing in, and you can pour down any other nation. Don't make it all Arabs. Have locals, have activists, have college students at the countries that you're in. Have them come with you, train with you, be the front men and women of you. You don't have to be in Arabic, all Arab organizations run by Arabs. You have to involve other individuals too to help them with their experience and their presentation to be part with the society that you're living in and be able to integrate and assimilate and live a life of a normal person outside of the crazy countries that we originally came from.
Thank you for that, Sherif. That is, I think, the last of the questions, and in fact, our time is coming to an end. So in fact, thank you very much to the questioner who translated the question for me in advance of me asking for it. You anticipated my needs, and I'm grateful. I'd just like to take a moment to echo the calls that have been made by our speakers here today, and to thank them for their contributions, both in relation to their work and today. We are here in Geneva whilst the conference is going on, and there are a number of people listening to this who are members of the press, who are journalists, and who have the platforms on which to raise these important issues. I urge those who are listening to publicise these issues as widely as you can. A key theme coming out from today is that there is a lack of transparency and an informational void. We need answers, both in relation to specific cases, but also the AIMC and the structures more broadly. I urge those of you who are with me today to help us seek those answers through the means available to you. And I'd just like to take a final opportunity to thank the Press Club for hosting us here today. I hope we haven't taken up too much of your time. Thank you very much.